ready? Let's do it. Welcome back to the GROklahoma podcast, everyone. Today we have the honor of hosting a distinguished guest with a rich healthcare research and academia background. He is currently the Lynn Emeritus Professor in the Department of Family and Community Medicine at OUHSC. And their journey from Durham to this esteemed position is fascinating. It's a fascinating tale of dedication and achievement. They graduated from Durham High School and the University of Michigan before earning an MD from Duke University. After a 3-year residency in family medicine at the University of Rochester Highland Hospital, they embarked on a transformative experience as a generalist physician in a remote village in Ghana, West Africa. This global perspective significantly changed and shaped their approach to healthcare. When they returned to the U.S., they joined a full-spectrum family practice in Hillsborough, North Carolina, before transitioning to the faculty at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center. Over the years, their focus shifted to the care of older people, leading to the establishment of the Oklahoma Geriatric Education Center and later the Oklahoma Center on Aging. Our guest contribution extends beyond clinical practice as they obtained a Master's of Public Health degree in Biostatistics and Epidemiology and were elected to the Institute of Medicine in 2008. Now that they are in retirement, they continue to consult for the James W. Mould Oklahoma Primary Healthcare Improvement Cooperative, further emphasizing their commitment to healthcare improvement. Notably, our guest has authored 2 books, one for patients and one for doctors, advocating a patient-centered approach to health and healthcare called goal-oriented care. Their expertise spans career pivots, community engagement research, navigating academia, and innovative research methodologies. Join us today as we have a robust conversation with Dr. James W. Mould. What we do on the podcast is really to get started with the beginning years. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and early life experiences? And if there were anything in your childhood that would have, sparked your interest in medicine?
I was always interested in biology. I had a bone collection and a feather collection, and I spent a lot of time outdoors, and so I had an interest in animals mostly. And my mother was interested in plants, so I guess in general, the family was interested in biology. And the expectation was that we would go to graduate school and do great things. And wherever it came from, the most important things to know about me are I'm an eternal optimist, which also then translates into persistence, because I always think that I can make things better. And it's just a matter of working harder, as hard as possible to make that happen. The other things, I've always been curious, and skeptical. I always argued with my dad constantly. I never accepted anything that people told me without them explaining to me a good reason. So I think all of those things were helpful to me as a future researcher. Everyone in my family had something to do with research. My dad was an organic chemist. My mother was trained in chemistry and ran a research laboratory at Duke. My brother is a biochemist. My sister was an immunologist. My son is a researcher, an immunologist. So I guess I was sort of, I had the attitude and environment to become a future researcher. I also had a great family, and I guess I've been extremely lucky from then on, basically throughout my life. I've been extremely fortunate. I've never had that problem. I've always thought the purpose of my life was to make the world a better place. And subsequently, I discovered that it was all. And I've always wondered why people have so much trouble finding purpose in life. also important for me to focus on making myself a better person. And I think that those two missions, I guess you'd call them, have held me through the years. I've never wondered what the purpose of life was.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's definitely something to live by. Making ourselves a better person. Would you let us know taking us back to your early years, especially when you went to high school, how did these formative experiences shape your path towards pursuing an MD degree?
I took all the courses I could in high school, math and science and so forth, and placed out of a bunch of requirements in college because of that. I had a good high school. Back then, the teachers were mostly the wives of professionals. They hadn't necessarily gone to school to be teachers. That was what they wanted to do. So it was a different sort of environment at that time. We had really good education in the public school system. I was accepted early decision at the University of Michigan. My parents had both gone to Big Ten schools. I didn't really have a very favorable opinion of the Ivy League schools, so I didn't even apply there. And I loved every minute I was at the University of Michigan. It was a wonderful place to be. As far as deciding to become a doctor, at that time, it was a different time where, a lot of us just kind of cruised along from one step to the next without really thinking about where we were going. Nowadays people have an idea of what their profession is going to be, and they go to college to be trained or to begin their training toward that profession. I was just there. I knew I was going to go to graduate school, and it was another step along that. I think I chose medicine because it was a chance to use my interest in biology to perhaps help people. That's the best I can come up with. I had to make a choice at one point between field and stream biology, where I could be outdoors counting salamanders, which sounded really appealing to me, or medical school, and I chose medical school. So that's how that happened.
We're glad you chose medical school. Salamanders will always be all right. So, following your medical education, you embarked on a unique journey as a generalist physician in a remote village in Ghana. What part of Ghana? I'm Nigerian, by the way. Ghana is just next door. What part of Ghana? I'm curious to know. And then, how did this global experience influence your perspective on healthcare, especially how you brought your practice back to the U.S.?
Yeah, well, I have to back up just a minute and answer a question that you didn't ask, which is why I chose to be a family doctor.
Yes.
So, in medical school, I found that it was mostly a course in a foreign language. Basically, I learned the language of medicine, and I learned the culture of medicine, and I was very frustrated with the education. Even though I'm sure I got the best possible medical education, but it was so much memorization, and I never liked foreign languages anyway. And I was frustrated. I also was frustrated with how I saw people being taken care of in the medical center. I didn't think it wasn't what I thought it was going to be in terms of interpersonal relationships and caring for people. I thought it was mostly about diseases. So I had a couple of long experiences, unsanctioned experiences with general practitioners in small towns in the west of the United States. I worked in Idaho and Wyoming during the summer between my second and third year, and I had a totally different view of how healthcare could be practiced, and I really liked it. And so when it came time to decide what specialty to choose or what residency to go to, I thought I wanted to be a family doc in a small town like what I had seen in Idaho and Wyoming. The other thing that appealed to me, at that time, the specialty of family medicine had just been sanctioned. And it was attracting a whole bunch of revolutionaries. I mean, people who really wanted to improve healthcare, and that appealed to me. So I joined the revolution, and I became a family doc. I went to a residency program that was not training people to go to small towns. Unfortunately, my first choice, I didn't get my first choice. My first choice of residency was training people to go to small towns. Didn't get that one. I was lucky. I got into a residency program that actually was much better suited to my future. And it had attracted people from all over the country, a bunch of idealists, basically. A lot of people ended up in academia, a lot of really bright people. And it was just a great experience. We took care of underserved patients and felt good about that. It was truly a good experience. As far as Africa was concerned, I started thinking about Africa in my second year of residency. My mother had always wanted to go to Africa to see the animals. So I thought, well, this is a chance. They probably need doctors in Africa. So I looked at a bunch of catalogs, mostly religious catalogs, church-based catalogs, but I wasn't a part of a church. So there was a catalog called Option, and it had a bunch of opportunities in Africa. So I wrote off to a whole bunch of places, and I got letters back from East Africa where the animals are, and they said, we'd love to have you, but we're in the middle of a war right now, and so we don't have any supplies and wouldn't really want to come here. And then I got a letter from Ghana, a town called Jarapa, which is up in the northwest corner of Ghana near Wa. And they said, we'd love to have you. When can you be here? So I figured, well, Africa, how big could Africa be? I mean, if they don't have animals in Ghana, I could probably just, take a train or a short plane ride and go see the animals.
Yeah.
Wrong. Africa is huge, and the only animals in Ghana were goats, cows, chickens, guinea hens. So anyway, so I was in Africa for 5 months. We left early. I thought I was going to be there for a year, but I kept getting sick. So I would get.
Was it malaria? What got to you?
I had every tropical. I had all the tropical diseases, and as I got them. Yeah. Then the malaria broke through. I was on malaria prophylaxis, but if I got something else like Giardia or I had dengue fever at one point, then the malaria would break through the prophylaxis. So the last illness I had was very frightening, and convinced me and my wife that we probably needed to get out of there before I died. But the things I learned in Africa, most important things, were that happiness and unhappiness are not really related to each other very closely. Happiness has to do with your attitude toward life, whereas unhappiness has a lot to do with what you want that you can't have. Now, the people in Ghana, in this tiny little town, had almost nothing. I mean, they were very poor, barely enough to eat, barely a roof over their head and so forth. They were just as happy as the people in the United States, perhaps more so, until they had been to the big city of Accra and had seen what other people had, and then they became
unhappy, miserable.
Right. So the other thing I learned was the importance of prevention. I saw every preventable disease that there is. I think, polio and tetanus, and measles, pneumonia, and, a whole variety of preventable diseases, yellow fever, typhoid, all those things. So I became convinced of the importance of immunizations and other preventive measures as well. So that's mostly what I learned from my experience in Africa.
Thank you for sharing that. So you also took an interest in gerontology. So family medicine is one, and then you specializing in taking care of, doing geriatric care. What what was the push towards that, and what would you say has been just some of your highlights, working in that subspecialty?
Well, when I got back from Africa, I went into private practice, and I guess to make a long story short, my personality is pretty well suited to the care of older people. I'm very honest, and I'm not much of a, I don't know, I'm just a straightforward, honest person, and it seemed to go over well with my older patients. And plus it was complex enough. I enjoyed the complexity of it. So when I decided to leave practice to become an academician, it just was fortuitous that when I came to Oklahoma, the person who had been doing the geriatric training for the residents had just left. So it was kind of an opening, a hole. And this was very similar to my decision to become a family physician, because at that time, geriatrics was really new in the United States. It had come here from Scotland, and it was exciting. And it was the next phase of the revolution. I thought, not only were we going to take care of people as human beings, but we're going to work together. It was about teamwork. Because more people needed to be involved in that than just doctors. It was complex enough that we needed to have interdisciplinary teamwork. So I joined that revolution, and I started developing clinical teaching sites for the residents and medical students. And that brought me into the experiences at the rehabilitation hospital. So at that time, there was University of Oklahoma had a full spectrum rehabilitation hospital. And that's where I started building the teaching sites. So we had an inpatient rehabilitation unit and an outpatient assessment clinic, and then later an outpatient continuity clinic, all located at the rehabilitation hospital. So I came in close contact and was working with people from physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, nursing, social work, psychology, and so forth. Which that experience was formative in the sense that that's when I started thinking about goal-oriented care. But I also I'd never written a grant before, but the opportunity came to write a big grant to establish a geriatric education center. And I worked with someone from Tulsa who had written grants. We met in Stroud at the motel every few weeks and hashed out this grant. There was also somebody from Norman that helped with that, and we didn't get it. But then the next year we reapplied and were successful. And so at that point, I pretty much became a full-time geriatrician. So I was running that center. We had a division of geriatrics within the family medicine department. And I basically gave up taking care of younger people, and my practice was all geriatrics. And we were preparing to develop a fellowship in geriatrics at that time.
Oh, wow. Thank you for walking us through that. So, yes, you did establish those two centers, the Oklahoma Geriatric Education Center and later the Oklahoma Center on Aging. What would you say were some of the challenges and successes in developing these centers, and how have these centers contributed to advancing healthcare for the aging population?
It's a difficult question. I think that the main value of the Geriatric Education Center is, and it worked well at OU Health Science Center because we have all the different disciplines, sort of all in the same place. So it brought people together who had been in separate buildings, but had never, hadn't really had a chance to work closely together. So I think that's what mostly we accomplished with that. And we also sort of put ourselves in a position to later apply for the big money from the Reynolds Foundation to establish the Department of Geriatrics, but that's another story. So at that point, I also had a family and a life outside of work. And so my wife asked if we were going to stay in Oklahoma the rest of our lives. And she said the kids were at the age where if we were going to move, it would be the right time to move. So I actually ended up taking a job at the University of Louisville, which was closer to our families, and it was an endowed chair position in geriatrics. And it was well-funded. I had assistants that were funded and so forth. I had money to do research and everything. But it turned out it was a bad, not a good place for my wife. She wasn't able to do what she needed to do. And so we left after a year, and we had to decide where to go. And I decided to come back to Oklahoma because that's where she had been happy. And also, I negotiated I asked if they would pay for me to get an MPH. And I had always wanted to do research, but I was told that I was too old to start a research career. And, I'd gotten caught up in geriatrics, teaching clinical work and so forth, and I just didn't have the protected time to do it. And so I negotiated for the MPH and also to take over the research division in the department and begin a research career.
Thank you so much for walking us through how all of that came to fruition, especially the importance of collaborating and not giving up when you first started the grant and it wasn't funded, and then going back in there again and reapplying the next year. What year was the meeting you had at Stroud with the grant writer? What year was that?
When I was meeting with the person from Tulsa, that was 1989.
Wow.
People need to remember that life is long. I mean, you have lots of time to figure out what to do, and you don't have to be in a big hurry. I had 3 different phases of my academic career. I started out in the pre-doc medical school division, then I became a geriatrician, and then I became a researcher. And it seemed like I did research for a long time before I actually retired.
Thank you for that. That's a good quote. Life is long. Don't be in a hurry. You were elected to the Institute of Medicine in 2008, which is very notable. And could you share how this recognition has shaped your subsequent endeavors in research and academia, and how that felt like for you?
I don't think it's helped that much. The Institute of Medicine has 2 components. One is the awards part of it, which is what I was given. And then there's the work part of it, where they actually produce important recommendations. I've only been peripherally involved in the work part of it. I've reviewed a couple of their products and given some feedback, which they didn't take. As far as the award was concerned, I guess it got me some recognition within the Health Sciences Center. When I got the notification, I didn't know what it was about. I didn't know what the Institute of Medicine. They invited me to be a member, and I had to pay $200. And I said, I get invited to be lots of things. I'm not sure I want to pay the $200. So I put the letter aside, and I said, well, I'll ask some people and see if they know what this is about. And then 2 weeks later, I started getting all these emails congratulating me. And so I was very glad that I had saved the letter. And so I paid the money. I don't think it certainly was an honor. Those things come about because of who you know. I'd done a part-time sabbatical in Washington, D.C. at the American Academy of Family Practice Policy Center. And the fellow who ran the Policy Center liked my ideas, and we had been in residency together. He was a year ahead of me in residency. He's the one, I think, who nominated me. And I was well known because of the practice-based research network that we had developed So I had presented at a lot of meetings, and people knew me. So the combination of having someone willing to do the work, to nominate you, and then being fairly well known across the country, that's why I got in. It's not because I'm any great shape compared to other people who could have gotten it.
I'd like to think you earned it with all the work you've done and all of your accomplishments. That's just my thought, though. You've done a lot, especially when it comes to shaping family practice. Can you just highlight some of the impact that your work has had, especially on the community level?
Let me just tell you about the research, I guess. So I think the two impacts I've had, the one has to do with research, and the other, I hope, has to do with goal-oriented care. So let's talk about research. So when I got back to Oklahoma, the department was writing a grant. It was called a Department Establishment Grant, and it had several components. And they asked me to write a component to establish a practice-based research network. And I think that was because the Oklahoma Academy of Family Practice had heard about practice-based research networks, and they wanted one. And I don't think neither they nor I knew that much about what they were. I had a little bit of knowledge. Anyway, I wrote that section, and that was the only section of the grant that got funded. So then I had to figure out how to establish a practice-based research network. And it was very helpful that I had been in private practice. So I got together with several of the doctors in the Oklahoma City area, Edmond and around, people that I had some acquaintance with, people who had trained at OU. And I asked them, I said, we're going to have this money. What can we do together to make your lives better and satisfy my need to publish papers and get grants and advance my career and so forth. So we figured out that it had to be research that was actually practical, useful, and that they also wanted resources. So we called it the Oklahoma Physicians Resource/Research Network. And I had in my head that I was going to study all the important questions in primary care, like, does continuity matter? And they said, Jim, we want to study brown recluse spider bites. And so I listened to them. We did that, and I learned that they actually knew better than I did what we ought to be doing. It turned out to be a wonderful study. I learned a heck of a lot about research at the interface between research and practice. And what I learned was that it needs to be collaborative. You can't just fly in there like sometimes they call it mosquito research or helicopter research or whatever. If you work together, you can actually do important work, and the dissemination part is easy because everybody's already been involved from the beginning. So So we started doing research. And then the university almost got the death penalty because someone in Tulsa was enrolling people in a study of melanoma that should have been enrolled and wasn't following the rules and so forth. So the NIH just about ended funding opportunities for the university. So the university tightened up on all its regulations with regard to enrolling patients. So we could no longer study patients. And so it became impractical because all the doctors in the network, and we had, by that time, maybe we had 100 doctors or something like that. And they would have all had to take a 2-week course on how to do randomized control trials, which they weren't going to be doing anyway. So we started studying practices because we could enroll practices. We ourselves could do that. And so we started studying practices. And that's what got us into this area of implementation research, how to help practices improve their processes of care. And serendipitously, as these things happen, I was at a meeting, and there's a fellow in Canada that was using what they call practice facilitators, people who had usually an MPH degree or maybe a nursing degree, and would spend time in practices helping them improve their processes of care. And so we adopted that method and brought that method to the United States, and it added a piece called academic detailing, which some people were doing in the Boston area. And developed a process that worked. I mean, we basically could help people improve their process of care. It was somewhat expensive, I guess. It was all paid for by grants, eventually by contracts, but it worked, and nobody else had anything that worked. And so we sort of became known for that kind of research. We developed some of our own methods, actually, that collaborative methods, ways of sharing best practices among the practices in the network and so forth. And that's how I got into the Institute of Medicine, was that work. As a result of that, they established, when I retired, they established the cooperative, the Oklahoma Primary Care Improvement Cooperative, as part of the Oklahoma Center for Clinical and Translational Research. Also, we established, as we were doing that work, we realized it looked a lot like cooperative extension in agriculture. And so I started promoting the idea of a cooperative extension system for primary care throughout the country. It actually made it into the Affordable Care Act. It wasn't actually funded, but it was assigned to the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and they started putting out grants to help people establish a cooperative extension system for primary care. And that has had some impact. And we got some of those big grants. As I was leaving, we got a big $14 million grant that I helped to write related to that idea. But in the process of working on that, the people I was working with from other places felt that we needed to include the community, not just the primary care practices, but the communities needed to be more heavily involved. So I worked with the health department, State Department of Health, and some folks there, and we established what we call an extension, the Oklahoma Primary Healthcare Extension System, which is made up of community organizations called county health improvement organizations that include primary care and all the other key groups. And I'd hoped at some point that OFIC and OFUS would kind of join together, but if that hasn't happened yet, maybe it will in the future. So both of those still exist, and they're functional, and they've done great things, and I feel very good about that. And plus, the method that we developed has basically spread throughout the country. So pretty much everybody that does quality improvement in primary care now uses practice facilitators. So I think that's a lasting legacy, if you will. And then, a lot of the work that we did, a lot of the research that we did, people use that information. We have the largest collection of brown recluse spider bites ever published. Plus, the largest collection of people with, the largest studies of peripheral neuropathy in primary care and night sweats. And people are still contacting me as the world's expert on night sweats.
Thank you. Yes, it did. It did. Thank you so much. I'm also curious to know the impact of your work on just community engagement, because it's also a central theme that came out from your work. Are you able to just highlight some of your experiences so far, especially bridging communities of practices together?
Yeah, the network, the practice-based research network, I think, was a great thing for the members. We connected them with through a listserv, and we had annual meetings. And some of these folks that were very isolated in rural towns, I think, all of a sudden felt connected to something bigger and were excited about collaborating on things that they thought would make a difference in their practice. Some of that's changed as all the private practices have had to join health systems and so forth. It's made it a little bit more complicated, not quite as interesting, but not interesting, not the word, not quite as intimate or relationship-based as it used to be. But I think we kept some people in practice. People who were going to quit practice decided to stay because they all of a sudden felt a connection. They could see other people were just as interested as they were in trying to improve things. You want to hear about goal-oriented care?
Yes, you can share a little bit about that. That would be nice, because we've talked about that a lot.
Okay, so that's a separate track. So what happened was when I was at the rehab hospital, people were talking about goals, and I was also working with some educators who were talking about goals, and I started thinking, why don't doctors talk about goals? And then I started thinking, what if we focused on goals instead of problems? And that was a night I wrote. So I went and I drafted a paper in 1991. I took it to some colleagues in the department, and I said, "This seems like an obvious idea. Doesn't seem like it's that complicated, or it seems obvious." And they sent me to a book by Thomas Kuhn on paradigm shifts, and I said, it's not that big a deal, and this just seems fairly straightforward. All you have to do is think about what you're trying to accomplish, and then decide whether the disease matters or not. Well, anyway, that was the start of my thinking about that, and I published a number of papers through the years, becoming more and more frustrated that doctors didn't seem to understand what I was talking about. Or didn't want to do it, or didn't think they could do it. So I proved within my own practice that it could be done, and I became pretty good at it. But I still couldn't convince other people to do it. So when I retired, I had some time. Plus, I heard from a fellow in Belgium who had read that 1991 paper and said it changed his life, basically. He began designing curricula around it, and the whole country of Belgium now was excited about it. And so I was prompted to do what I had been told to do by people I was working with at the time, which was write a book. And they said, well, probably you're not going to convince doctors, so just write the book for patients. Have them convince the doctors. So that's what I did. So I wrote a book for patients. But then once I'd written the book for patients, I sort of knew how to do that. And I thought, well, I can just turn this into medicalese and write essentially the same book for doctors. So that's how I ended up writing the two books. And that's my passion. And I look back at my life and my career, and I think that was my life's mission from the very beginning, was to try to figure out a way to make medicine more humane. And I think that's the best model I've seen for how to do that. It makes rational sense. It's something that doctors should resonate with. Patients definitely resonate with it. And so the concepts and methods have been refined through the years as I've thought about this. I've been thinking about this for over 30 years now, and so I'm still trying to sell it. And I think some people are beginning to buy. There are a lot of obstacles, and I may lose the battle, but I'll go down fighting.
Sounds like a revolutionary. Oh, wow.
So that's what I'm proudest of, actually. And that's where persistent optimism and persistence come into play here.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So, as you know, our population, we're living longer. So due to so many factors, advanced technology to just name a few. How do you foresee the future of geriatric care changing, given just how much longer we're living, but not necessarily healthier?
Well, the other reason that goal-oriented care came out of my experience in geriatrics is because you can't take care of old people with a problem-oriented model. I mean, because, as you get older, if the goal is to be normal, which it seems like that's the goal of medicine, is to eliminate all abnormalities, it becomes impossible at some point. It's the only way you can deal with it is to define normal aging, and sort of fudge the definition of normal, So it just doesn't make any sense. I think, and old people know that medical care is not ideal, but they don't know exactly what's wrong with it. I really, that plus the whole field of genomics is going to change everything about how we think about healthcare, because people have spent a lot of time trying to identify people who have multimorbidity or complex patients, and the fact of the matter is we are all complex. We all have multimorbidity. Just wait until you have your DNA mapped, and you're going to find that we have thousands and thousands of risk factors, every single one of us, and we also have thousands and thousands of protective factors. And how are you going to make sense out of that? You can't go around trying to fix everything. It's not possible, and it's expensive. It's obvious now that that's true if you look at old people, but it's going to be obvious in the future when you look at everybody. We're going to have our DNA mapped at birth, and all of a sudden a baby is going to look to doctors like an old person looks now. Once you have all that information in front of you, and you can no longer try to make people normal. You've got to have another way to think about it. And so I think it has to happen. They have to think in terms of what's important. What is health? When I ask patients how they define health, it's being able to do the things that make life worthwhile for as long as possible. That's health. It's not about absence of diseases. So I'm going to have to look at it. We're going to have to come up with a different way of looking at it. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to figure out what to do or afford what we're doing now. So I have confidence. I'm very optimistic that eventually it'll happen. Maybe not in my lifetime. And it's a shame because I'm going to need a lot of health care eventually. And I hate what's happened to medicine. I hate it. Seems like it's gotten worse instead of better. And I want to put a plug in for the doctors in Oklahoma. We have had a heck of a time finding care in Durham, Chapel Hill, Raleigh. Durham's called the City of Medicine. We have Duke University, University of North Carolina, Wake Medical Medicine, so forth. Nowhere near as good a care as we got in Oklahoma. And the doctors that I worked with throughout the state, head and shoulders above anything we found here. So I don't know why, but so impressed with the Oklahoma medical system.
That's encouraging to hear. Thank you for that plug. So you've talked about just how genomics, for example, will change the field in the future. What are your thoughts on emerging technologies like AI, especially how they're being propped up to, for example, enhance quality of primary care and maybe improve primary care practices?
Well, it's interesting because when I left practice, one of my goals was to develop I guess you'd call it almost like it's a very rudimentary AI program. I wanted to develop a computer program that help doctors make the correct diagnosis. And I gave up that idea because I didn't have enough time at that time, but also because other people were doing it. And as other people were developing these same programs, I saw the problem, which was that they wanted the computer to do too much. They weren't satisfied to use the computer just as a reminder of things you might have forgotten. In other words, an extension of your natural ability. They were trying to make the computer give you the answer, which was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to come up with the answer. I just wanted a memory trigger that would help me extend my ability. And I think that's the potential danger of AI is if it replaces what we already do well, then people's brains begin to atrophy. And it's sort of my mind jumped over to biostatistics. So when I took biostatistics, I was forced to do the math, and I thought, we have computer programs that do that. Why are you having me go through the math? I think it was important to go through the math because, unless you know how it works, you can get some really bad results from just using a computer program. You have to know when to use it and when and how it can go wrong, what the assumptions are underlying the computer program, and so forth. And I think that's the danger of AI
Yeah. I mean, that's a balanced sentiment to have, like looking at the propensity it has for good, but also how it can hurt what we already have. And so thank you so much for sharing that. Currently retired, but it seems like you've hardly slowed down. So are you just at liberty to share with us like how you feel your time these days?
No, that's right. Well, the question I learned to ask my patients was, "What's a typical day look like for you?" So my typical day looks like this: I take the dog for a long walk in the woods. We live in the woods, and then I come back and I work on the computer all morning, and I do my consulting work with the Oklahoma Primary Healthcare Extension Cooperative, which mostly involves reading literature and sending out important information to doctors around the state of Oklahoma through a program that we developed. And then I usually work on papers and books that I'm working on. So we've submitted 2 papers so far this year, and there's actually 3 papers this year. And I'm working on a book with a colleague. And what else? And then I spend 15 minutes each day studying Spanish online. Duolingo.
Oh, nice. What are you using? Duolingo? What app are you using?
I'm horrible at foreign languages, but at least I can get through the lessons. Then I eat lunch and have a nap, and then in the afternoon I do yard work, housework, errands, that sort of stuff. And then in the evening, usually watch TV and play the banjo and read. So read, watch some TV and play the banjo. So that's my life right now, and it's about the same each day, weekdays or weekends, and it's wonderful. I told my dad when he was getting older, I said, you look like you're in a rut. And he said, yeah, and I like it. And that's where I am right now.
But as you were, listing out the things you did, it doesn't seem to be like you're in a rut. It feels like you filled it with things you want to do and things that make your life more meaningful.
Yeah, so when I was in college, I took aptitude tests because I didn't know what I wanted to be. And it said I should be either a pediatrician or a farmer or an author. And so right now I'm writing things, lots of things, and we have a community garden, so I'm farming, and I'm still involved in medicine. So I think the test was right.
Yeah. In your case, that is. As we close up, I'd like to ask you this question, which I think speaks to the very heart of your life purpose to make things better. And you've talked a great deal about just your concerns about the current healthcare model we have. So if you could have a superpower, Dr. Maud, related to healthcare, what would it be and how would you use it to improve patient outcomes?
I would establish a cooperative extension system initially for primary care, and I would begin implementing goal-oriented care throughout the country. I would tell all the people out there that are trying to solve all the healthcare reformers. And in fact, I just submitted an article on this subject. I would tell them it wasn't ever about the money. You guys are spending way too much time trying to figure out how to pay for healthcare. It's not about the money. It's about the approach. It's about the mindset. It's about how to think about health and healthcare. And if you think about it in the way I'm suggesting, all those problems you're trying to solve will solve themselves. If you're looking at it from a goal-oriented perspective, it will cost a lot less money because people won't do stuff that doesn't matter. And you won't have to worry about liability because the relationship between doctors and patients will be strong. And quality will improve because people will be invested and outcomes will improve, because people will be invested in the plan because it matters to them. They've decided, they've collaborated on a plan and they're invested in that, and they'll be more likely to adhere to it. So that's what I would say.
And I think, thanks for that. And it goes back to just your passion towards goal-oriented care. And I know that some healthcare practices have started moving towards what we call fee for performance, because there's that emphasis on value-based care. How are your interventions really in driving, patient outcomes, and is it moving towards making the patient better versus you just saying, oh, this is what we did, but then the patient isn't feeling better? But all that to say, thank you so much for just sharing all of your passion with us today and your achievements and just things you're very passionate about. I've learned a great deal from our conversation, especially how to be a revolutionary at heart and the power of asking questions and your passion for making things better. I've definitely steered you towards a career that has, shaped family practice, and then above all, your heart for making medicine more humane and how despite the fears you have about medicine, you've also expressed your hope about it. And so thank you so much for your time today and sharing all of that with me.
Now, let me share one other experience I had where I was consulting on a program in Pennsylvania, and there were other consultants there and from family medicine, and one of them said to me, you really seem to try to actually put what you are discovering into practice. And he said it in such a way that was unusual. And I said, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? I assume that when we do research that we do it to try to improve something. And it just seemed like a novel concept to him. He was getting lots of grants and doing lots of research because he enjoyed doing research, I guess. it hadn't occurred to him that actually there was a purpose in doing research. I never looked at research as being something separate from trying to make the world a better place.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I imagine this is going to resonate a lot with our listeners. And if you ever want to come back again, we'll be very much excited to have you back on board. Perhaps maybe after writing more books or contributing to editorials, but in whatever capacity, we're more than happy to have you back. This was such an exciting time having you on the show and just, hearing a lot about your work and things you're passionate about. So thank you so much, Dr. Mold. I hope you have a lovely
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye-bye.
You too.
All right, everyone. That was the GROklahoma podcast. Thank you for staying, tuning in today. We hope you enjoy this episode. In any event, catch you on another episode of the GROklahoma podcast. I remain your host, Dr. Mo. Bye for now.